Hi all and welcome back to another video. If you've been following Claire and I over on Instagram, you'll know that we recently took a trip to Italy. It was a two-part trip, and in the first part of the trip we went to Milan, and in the second part we went to Lake Como. This video is going to be all about Milan. From a video camera point of view, I took the Fuji X-H2S. All of it was shot in f/log2 and has been graded with an plug-in Final Cut called Dehancer. I've been using it for a few weeks now and it makes it super easy to grade your videos. From a photography point of view, I took the Leica M10 along with a newly acquired 28mm F2.8 Elmarit. This was really the first trip that I've taken with both this camera and this lens, so I was super excited to see just how it got on, using it with a bit of purpose compared to more recently where it's been far more casual shooting. We're going to talk a little bit more about the lens towards the end of this video, but for now let's just jump into the trip and have a look at some of the images. Having got to Milan, the first real stop for us was heading right into the city centre and seeing two things that are right next to each other. One of them is the Duomo Cathedral and the other one is the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele kind of shopping area. They're right next to each other and both of these locations made me really happy that I had taken a 28mm lens along with me. Talking about the cathedral first then, the courtyard kind of area in front of the cathedral, although it's pretty big, I think if you were to take a 35 or a 50mm lens, you'd honestly struggle to fit it in frame. On my 28mm, you can just about get it in, but you are walking right towards the back of this kind of open area in front of the cathedral. The only thing that we'd actually booked prior to arriving in Milan was a trip to the roof. So you can actually take either a staircase to the top or you can pay a little bit more and take a lift to the top. Honestly, the stairs weren't that bad. Just being up on the roof was an awful lot of fun and I'd highly recommend it to anyone. Moving along to like the shopping centre area then, for me this was the highlight of the trip. This area I just think is incredible. Again, very pleased I took a 28mm because the ceiling in here is really high and I think that some of the more interesting architecture of this place is towards the top. There's some really cool paintings and details up there. So taking the 28mm meant even in portraits we were able to get some of the kind of more decorative part of the building in the shots. From a portrait point of view as well, this place is awesome because the roof of this is just all glass and the whole place acts like a massive soft box and gives you some really soft light. Some of my favourite photos from the trip were taken in this area. I also recommend as well that you take a trip here at night. At night time there's a different vibe here and the lighting just makes for very different feel to your images. As someone who lives in the UK, I just found the general architecture of Milan very different to here in the UK. We've got an awful lot of things like balconies, like shutters on windows, brightly coloured buildings, and I found myself a lot just taking pictures of the top parts of buildings. I don't know what it is about them, maybe they're a little bit subjectless, but I just really enjoy taking these images. I've got loads and loads of them, and I just like the way they look. It's kind of hard to describe why, because there's nothing special about these images, they just feel different than how things feel here in the UK. The other thing as well, in Europe, trams are super popular. Milan is no different. They have some really cool looking old trams as well. This image is one of my favourites. I do think maybe it would have benefited from a slightly longer lens other than the 28mm. With a bit of cropping, I think it improves a little bit, but I really like the colours, the feel of this image. Again, this is one of my favourite images from the trip. We also visited a Starbucks, which might seem very unnoteworthy, but the Starbucks in the middle of Milan is unlike any other Starbucks I've ever been to. It's built inside an old post office, and inside of it is a fully functioning roastery, and this roastery provides beans for an awful lot of the Starbucks inside of Europe. You can sit and drink your coffee and watch them work, and you can quite literally see coffee beans being transported via these tubes around the building. It's an awful lot of fun, and even if you're not into your coffee, there's also a bit of an alternative. So there is a bar area and you've got a whole bunch of cocktails along with an awful lot of coffee themed cocktails that we just couldn't help ourselves. We tried some of them on one of the evenings. Definitely doesn't feel like a Starbucks, but if you like that kind of thing, it's definitely worth a visit. The castle and surrounding park was also a highlight. The castle itself is made of bricks. I'm not sure I've ever seen anything like this before. Here in the UK, castles are typically made of stone. I also really like the park towards the back end of the castle, and going and seeing the Acro della Pace is a must. In terms of some photography tips then specifically for Milan, the usual getting up early definitely is something that's important in Milan, and you don't even need to get up that early. We found ourselves kind of getting out of the Airbnb in our case at 8 AM and things were far quieter than they are at 10 AM. Next up would be to make sure you bring a pretty wide angle lens. I know I've banged on about 28mm quite a lot here, but a lot of the architecture you're going to want to take photos of, but a lot of them don't have much space next to them, so if you're shooting things like a 50mm lens, you just might not be able to get them in. So if you're going to be taking photos of buildings, make sure you pack something wide as you just don't have to go super wide. 28mm was wide enough, but if you're only going to pack something like a 35 or a 50, you genuinely might struggle to photograph some things. Another one is to just watch out at how big Milan is. So we booked our Airbnb based on looking at the map, and we thought we were close to the center of Milan, but the scale just kind of caught us off. We ended up being nearly a 45-minute walk from the Airbnb to the center. Even though it looked really close on the map, just the scale just caught us off, and it's just something to bear in mind. If you're booking something and you think you're close to the center, just stick it in Google Maps to make sure, because Milan is a very, very big place. And another thing then is that you might have to sit out some of the day. Now, for us, we went in September and the temperature was still over 30 degrees, and 30 degrees might not sound all that bad, but honestly, it felt so much hotter than this. You can actually see people cross the road to walk in the shade and get out the sun. I'd say between 1 and 3 PM, especially if you're going in kind of hotter months than we did, be prepared to sit out. And if you are going to sit out, going and getting some Italian gelato might just be the thing to do. So I absolutely loved using the M10 on this trip, but let's talk about this lens a little bit, because this was the first time that I'd used this lens. So it's a 28mm F2.8 Elmarit. Now the only downside that I have found is that the aperture ring is really quite loose, and I thought maybe it'd just be my copy, but having looked online, this does seem to be a bit of a theme with them. Because of the lens's very, very small size, I found sometimes when I was focusing that I did accidentally knock the aperture ring. It's a pretty minor complaint, and I think the only complaint I have with this lens. Beyond that minor complaint, this lens is one of the smallest and cheapest Leica lenses you can buy, and f2.8 I actually think provides, for a 28mm, the perfect amount of background separation, where if I'm shooting a 28mm, I want the environment in my image, and I want there to be a bit of separation so you know exactly what my subject is, but I want you to be able to see the background still. I don't want it to be so soft back there that you don't even know I'm in Milan. So for me, this was actually, I think, one of my favourite lenses I have ever used. So in conclusion then, I absolutely love Milan, and I loved this combination of camera and lens too. When it comes to Milan, I think there's a bit of stigma that Milan is an expensive holiday. It's a bit of a kind of fashion city, but that was definitely not the case. This was some of the cheapest flights and Airbnb that I have ever booked, and it was the Formula 1 Monza weekend, which was just around the corner. So honestly, Milan doesn't have to be an expensive trip at all. I highly recommend it to anyone, and if you're going to go, just make sure you take a lens that's wide enough to be able to kind of photo the architecture of the city itself. So that's all for Milan. There is a second part of this video coming where we talk about Lake Como, which is just around the corner. And honestly, I think that video has some of my favorite photos I have ever taken. So here's a few of them up on the screen now that I did take with the Leica M10, just to kind of whet your appetite a bit. But if that's something you're interested in, then please do not forget to like and subscribe. I thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Cheers.